Investigator? Wrong. It matters a lot, because this isn't just some man. This is General Marcus Harlan, and the entire nation is watching how you treated him. The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time, Daniels didn't have a smirk ready. The story stopped being just about one man. Commentators debated it endlessly. Was this proof of systemic disrespect? Was it about race, about power, about authority? Or was it simply arrogance by two officers drunk on control? Civil rights leaders spoke out. Veterans called into radio stations. Outrage at a decorated soldier, a man who had given his life to service, could be treated with such disregard. Crowds gathered outside City Hall, holding signs that read, "Respect our soldiers." If they laughed at the general, "What about us?" We warned them too. And in the middle of it all was Marcus Harlan, a man who never asked to be a symbol, but who was becoming one, whether he wanted it or not. Long before he wore stars on his shoulders, Marcus Harlan was just a boy running barefoot through the streets of Birmingham. He remembered being 10 years old, watching his father come home covered in soot, his hands raw from the mill. He remembered his mother kneeling beside him, whispering, "You are more than what they see. Don't ever let their laughter tell you otherwise." Those words, spoken decades ago in a modest kitchen, rang louder in his ears now than the jeers of any officer, because his mother had been right, and now the whole world was beginning to see it too. Internal affairs was no longer just a routine process. It was a crisis management exercise under the glare of national attention. Every move was scrutinized. Every word in their reports had the potential to make headlines. The city's police chief, Harold Monroe, sat at the head of the table, his hands clasped tightly, knuckles white. He wasn't just worried about discipline. He was worried about survival, his department's reputation, his own job. Chief Monroe, stern. "Gentlemen, this is no longer about you. This is about the entire department. Do you understand?" Daniels leaned back in his chair, trying to wear that same mask of defiance. But the cameras outside, the chants of protesters, the constant stream of coverage, it was sinking in. Kravitz barely raised his eyes. His voice cracked when he muttered. "We didn't know who he was." Monroe slammed his hand against the table. "That's exactly the point. You should have treated him with respect no matter who he was." Meanwhile, behind the walls of the Pentagon, another meeting unfolded. Generals and defense officials sat in a secure briefing room, watching the footage replayed on loop. Some looked angry. Others looked afraid. Because if a man with Marcus Harlan's stature could be mocked, humiliated, dismissed on the street, what did that say about the treatment of thousands of lower-ranking soldiers who lacked a platform to defend themselves? One general, gray-haired and blunt, finally spoke. "Gentlemen, the military can't ignore this. Harlan isn't just one of ours. He is the symbol of service. And right now, the public sees him as a man who stood tall when others tried to tear him down. We need to stand with him." The room fell quiet. Decisions were being made that would ripple across the country. The distant rattle of helicopter blades, the sharp crack of gunfire. Marcus Harlan wasn't born into command. He earned it the hard way, decades earlier in Iraq. His unit had been ambushed. The desert night was alive with tracer fire. His men, young, terrified, bleeding, looked to him for guidance. He remembered gripping the radio, his voice steady even though his heart pounded. "Hold the line." I said hold. The line. And they did, because his voice wasn't just sound. It was authority carved from discipline, sacrifice, and unshakable will. That night, he dragged 3 wounded soldiers to safety himself. That night, he learned what leadership cost. And now, sitting in his home decades later, watching himself go viral, Marcus realized the battlefield had simply changed terrain. The city tried to contain the fire. Chief Monroe held a press conference flanked by stiff-faced officers. The air outside was thick with chants, reporters shouting over one another, cameras flashing. "Chief Monroe, we regret the disrespect shown to General Harlan. The officers involved have been placed on administrative leave pending investigation." But the crowd wasn't satisfied. One protester shouted, if he wasn't a general, would they have laughed him off the street? That question cut to the microphones, cut to the sound bites, and landed on millions of screens across the nation. Because it wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about everyone who had been dismissed, disrespected, disregarded, without a rank high enough to stop it. That night, Marcus drove through the same stretch of highway where it had all happened. The street lights flickered. The asphalt gleamed under the glow of his headlights. For a moment, he pulled over. The same spot. The same echo of laughter. He sat in silence, gripping the wheel, before whispering to himself, "You warned them, and now the whole country hears it." Low hum of news anchors speaking over each other. Cable networks played the clip in endless rotation. General Harlan disrespected on camera. Police misconduct under fire. Military honor versus civilian authority. Every panel had an opinion. Every headline spun outrage. And yet, in Washington, the president remained silent. The White House press secretary dodged questions with polished deflections. But silence can be louder than words. Veterans groups noticed. Activists noticed. The public noticed. On the steps of a courthouse in Atlanta, a small group gathered. Not famous, not powerful, just people who had lived through what Marcus survived. But without the armor of a uniform, a young black man stepped to the microphone, his voice cracking with emotion. When they pulled him over, they didn't see a man who's bled for this country. They just saw another black man. What about the rest of us? What happens when we show our IDs and nobody listens? His words rippled across social media. For the first time, Marcus's case wasn't just a story, it was a mirror. Meanwhile, Marcus sat at home. His wife, Evelyn, placed a plate of food in front of him, but he barely touched it. Their grown daughter, Simone, sat across the table, watching her father's silence. Simone, softly, "Dad, I saw the video. The way you looked at them. Like you weren't scared. Like you knew who you were. That's the man you raised me to be proud of." Marcus finally looked up. His voice was quiet but heavy. "Simone, I wasn't thinking about pride. I was thinking about all the times it could have gone the other way. All the names we never knew because they didn't get a chance to speak." Tears welled in his daughter's eyes. Because behind the uniform, behind the rank, behind the viral moment, was a man carrying decades of scars. The silence from Washington broke when a senator from Georgia stood on the Senate floor. She held up a still image of Marcus, standing tall, his ID in his hand, the officer's laughter frozen in time. Senator Caldwell, passionate. This is not just about one man. This is about a nation where service and sacrifice can be mocked by the very people sworn to protect us. If a general can be dismissed, what hope do ordinary citizens have? The chamber filled with murmurs. Cameras caught every angle. The story had jumped from headlines to legislation. Then it happened. Thousands of veterans, Marines, sailors, airmen, soldiers, converged on Washington. Some walked with canes, others in wheelchairs, many in uniform jackets worn thin from time. They carried signs that read, "Respect our service. Justice for all, not just a few." The sight was overwhelming. Men and women who had worn the flag on their shoulders were now demanding the country live up to the weight of it. At the front of the march, without saying a word, walked Marcus Harlan. Not leading, not demanding, just walking. And yet, the cameras only saw him. The president could not stay silent any longer. In a rare primetime address, he sat behind a resolute desk, the flag draped behind him. President, solemn. General Marcus Harlan has served this nation with distinction. What happened to him on that highway was unacceptable. But this is about more than one man. It is about the respect we owe to every citizen, every soldier, every soul who calls this nation home. It was a carefully measured speech. But the impact was undeniable, because for the first time, the highest office in the land was echoing the same words Marcus had whispered to himself in silence. "You warned them, and now the whole country hears it." The courthouse was swarmed. Reporters fought for angles. Protesters held signs on both sides. Inside, the officers who had mocked Marcus Harlan now faced the weight of the system they once served. Marcus sat quietly in the front row, his uniform crisp, his chest heavy with medals. But he didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man forced to relive the humiliation of that night. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel Vega, stood before the jury. Rachel Vega, firm, steady. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not just about disrespect. This is about abuse of power, racial profiling, and endangering the life of a man who has given everything to protect this country. If General Harlan wasn't wearing his rank that night, would he be here today to tell his story? Her words cut through the courtroom like a blade. The defense lawyer rose, smoothing his suit. Defense attorney measured, almost smug. These officers acted within reason. They were cautious. They didn't know who they were dealing with. Hindsight is easy, but in the moment, they followed protocol. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Marcus clenched his fists. He knew that excuse. He'd heard it 1,000 times. It was the script used to erase accountability. Then came the moment no one expected. Rachel Vega called her witness. General Marcus Harlan, please take the stand. The room shifted. Reporters scribbled. Cameras flashed. Marcus stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked slowly to the witness chair. Under oath, he faced the jury. Rachel Vega, softly. General, in your own words, what happened that night? Marcus took a deep breath, and then he began. Studio microphone, silence. A pause. Then Marcus speaks. Marcus Harlan measured, low. I warned them. I told them who I was. Not because I wanted special treatment, but because I wanted to live. A hush fell over the courtroom. Marcus, when they laughed, it wasn't just at me. It was at every soldier who ever fought for this country. Every black man who ever prayed to make it home alive. They laughed because they thought I was powerless. They were wrong. His voice trembled, not with weakness, but with truth. The defense lawyer rose, trying to rattle him. Defense attorney. General, isn't it true you raised your voice that night? That you were confrontational. Marcus looked him dead in the eye. Marcus, I raised my voice because I wanted to be heard. Isn't that what every American deserves? To be heard when their life is in danger. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Even the judge had to pound the gavel to quiet the storm. After weeks of testimony, the jury left to deliberate. The nation held its breath. On the courthouse steps, people camped out overnight, waiting for the decision. Cable news ran countdown clocks. Marcus, however, sat at home with Evelyn and Simone. For the first time in months, he turned off the TV. Evelyn, gently. Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already changed this country. Marcus stared out the window, whispering more to himself than to her. But will it change enough? Sound of ticking clock, faint news broadcasts, voices from a restless crowd outside. The jury was sequestered. Inside their quiet room, 12 men and women argued over evidence, words, and truths too heavy to ignore. Outside, the world refused to sleep. Across America, televisions glowed. Bars stayed open late. Churches held vigils. And outside the courthouse, 1,000 people gathered, chanting, praying, demanding justice. Every hour, news anchors speculated. Will the jury convict the officers of misconduct? Or will this become another case lost in the cracks of accountability? In living rooms and dorm rooms, in break rooms and subway stations, the case had become the conversation. Some defended the officers, insisting they followed orders. Others saw Marcus's humiliation as proof of a system broken beyond repair. And then there were the veterans, men and women from every branch, every race, every rank, who stood united in one message. If they can do this to a general, what chance do the rest of us have? Marcus didn't watch the coverage. He sat in his living room, staring at his daughter, Simone, asleep on the couch. Evelyn brought him tea, her hand brushing his shoulder. Evelyn, softly, you've carried this long enough. Tomorrow, let the world carry it. Marcus nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on Simone, because deep down, he wasn't just waiting for a verdict on the officers. He was waiting for an answer to a question he'd carried his whole life. Does this country see me as equal? The sun rose over a restless city. The courthouse steps looked like a battlefield of posters, candles, and folded flags. When the jury sent word they had reached a decision, the crowd swelled. Cameras snapped. Helicopters circled. Inside, the air was electric. Marcus walked in wearing full uniform, metals polished, shoes sharp, not as a show of power, but as a reminder he had earned his dignity. The officers sat stiffly at the defense table, eyes darting between their lawyers and the jury box. The judge entered. The gavel struck. And with one phrase, history froze in time. Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict? Courtroom ambience. Hushed whispers. Shuffling papers. A faint cough. The foreperson stood. In her hands trembled a paper that would decide not only the fate of 2 officers, but the fate of millions watching. Judge, on the charge of assault under color of authority, how do you find defendant? The pause felt endless. Even the cameras seemed to stop recording. Foreperson clear, steady, guilty. The word hit like thunder. The officers shifted, jaws tightening. One muttered under his breath. Their attorney slumped. But the courtroom didn't exhale. Not yet. The judge continued. On the charge of unlawful detention, how do you find defendant? Foreperson, guilty. A cry rang out from the gallery, muffled, then drowned by a wave of gasps and cheers. Count after count, charge after charge. Every word, guilty, rolled like drumbeats of justice. Outside, the news spread in seconds. Phones buzzed. TV anchors stammered over breaking news graphics. The crowd outside the courthouse erupted. Some screamed in triumph. Others wept openly, arms raised skyward. Veterans saluted the sky. Children perched on their parents' shoulders clapped along with chants of, "Justice, justice, justice." For once, the chant didn't feel hollow. Marcus sat motionless, his hands folded, his eyes locked on the jury. Not in anger, not in triumph, but in a silent, weary gratitude. When the foreperson glanced at him, just for a second, Marcus nodded, a quiet acknowledgement between 2 souls. "Thank you for seeing me." Evelyn squeezed his hand. Simone's eyes brimmed with tears, whispering, "Simone, they heard you, Dad." For Marcus, it wasn't about punishment. It was about proof. Proof that dignity wasn't negotiable. That respect couldn't be laughed away. Within hours, headlines flashed worldwide. Officers convicted in general's unlawful arrest. Courtroom eruption as jury rules against police. Marcus J. Reynolds, a name history won't forget. Talk shows are debated. Politicians scrambled to issue statements. And for once, across the divided screens of America, the story wasn't about doubt or denial. It was about reckoning. Weeks later, the same courtroom was filled again, this time for sentencing. The officers sat rigid, flanked by attorneys, their crisp suits unable to hide the sweat on their brows. The judge, an older man with a voice like granite, wasted no words. "Judge, abuse of power is a betrayal. When those entrusted with law enforcement use that trust to humiliate, harm, or intimidate, it erodes the very foundation of justice. This court cannot and will not ignore such betrayal." The crowd leaned forward. "Judge, for the crimes of unlawful detention, abuse under color of authority, and assault, I hereby sentence each of you to 12 years in federal prison." Gasps rippled across the room. It wasn't the maximum, but it was heavy. Heavier than many had dared hope. The officer stared ahead, jaws clenched, as marshals stepped forward. Cameras captured the moment they were led away, a reversal of power that symbolized far more than 2 men in handcuffs. Outside the courthouse, microphones and cameras swarmed Marcus. For hours, he had stayed silent. But now, as chants of justice roared behind him, he finally spoke. Marcus, steady, measured. This was never about revenge. This was about respect. Respect for every man and woman who wears this uniform, and respect for every American who deserves to walk free without fear of humiliation or abuse. I warned them. They laughed. But today, the law reminded them. Rank may be earned in the military, but dignity is not something you give or take. It belongs to us all. The crowd erupted. Across the nation, the sentencing spark waves. Police departments announced new training on authority and respect. Congressional committees held hearings on abuse of power. Veterans groups released statements of solidarity, reminding the country that service doesn't erase skin color, but demands honor. And in homes across America, families sat together, parents explaining to their children why this mattered, why this moment, unlike so many others, felt different. Studio microphone, montage music, solemn strings fading into a hopeful swell. Months passed. The headlines quieted. The trials ended. But Marcus Reynolds' name never faded. He wasn't just a general anymore. He was a symbol. Universities invited him to speak. Civil rights groups asked him to stand with them. When Marcus spoke, it wasn't with fire. It was with steadiness, with a voice forged in years of command, discipline, and the weight of history. Marcus' speech to cadets at West Point. You will lead men and women who trust you with their lives. Never let pride, prejudice, or abuse stain that trust. Rank is a badge of responsibility, not superiority. And respect. Respect is the currency of true leadership. The cadets rose to their feet, clapping until the hall thundered. The sentencing of 2 officers alone couldn't rewrite centuries of mistrust, but it sparked change. Police departments introduced reforms named the Reynolds Protocol, mandatory de-escalation and respect training, especially when dealing with veterans and civilians of color. Military leaders used Marcus's story in lectures on dignity and discipline. Even Congress, for once, found rare unity in pushing forward oversight bills. The case became required reading in law schools. A benchmark, a reminder. Years later, documentaries would revisit that night. The dash cam footage, the courtroom cheers, the chants outside, preserved as a turning point in the ongoing struggle for justice. Students would write essays titled, "He warned them." They laughed. Then he showed his rank. And in every retelling, the lesson remained. Laughter at dignity always echoes hollow. But respect, once demanded, once earned, can shift the course of a nation. Marcus retired from active duty not long after the trial. Not out of defeat, but out of choice. He moved to a quiet home with Evelyn, where mornings meant coffee on the porch, and evenings meant stories with Simone's children. But every now and then when the phone rang, an invitation to speak, to guide, to stand, Marcus would answer, because some battles he knew were never truly over. He had warned them. They had laughed. But in the end, the nation had watched. And more importantly, it had listened. Another chapter closes, but the echoes remain. Thank you for watching Dark Case Diaries, where every story is more than crime. It's a reflection of us all. Stay safe, stay aware, and until next time, keep listening to the voices history tried to silence.